Sunday on the Oregon Fan Show, but you know and I know we're not going to be that serious. Today's guest is my friend, one of the experts and the kind of the historian of Oregon football, Brian Libby, Portland writer and author and longtime Duck fan. Brian, welcome. It is fantastic to have you.
Thank you. It's really a lot of fun to have the opportunity to talk with you.
Mel Renfro days until the Ducks start playing football, and you are the perfect guy to have in to talk about. As we can see right now, there's a picture of one of your books, one that many of us have on our bookshelf. Tell me a little bit about how that book came together and what you like about it as a writer.
Well, it was a little bit of an anomaly in my career, but I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to interview some of my heroes, really. I've been a full-time journalist since about 2001. And early in my career, I was kind of trying out a lot of things, a lot of topics to write about. And ultimately, I wound up writing about mostly architecture and design and the building industry. I happened to be in a bookstore sometime in the early 2000s, and I saw this book called Tales from Oregon State Sports, and it was like a history of every sport played at Oregon State University, and I could see that it was part of a series that publisher had done featuring a lot of college sports teams, and I thought there ought to be an Oregon Ducks book, but only football. And so I proposed the idea to them, and they said yes. And it was a challenge because they had a kind of ceiling as to how many words I could go. And I feel like I could have written something 5 times longer. But I just kind of got to work, and I really set out to interview as many key people in the history of Oregon football as I could. And it was a lot to squeeze in because I was starting from the very beginning in 1894. And so wanting to honor, like the Rose Bowl teams of, say, like 1916 and 1919, and some of the other great Oregon teams along the way, like the Len Casanova teams in the 50s and 60s, so forth. But really, it was just these pinch me moments where I thought, like, I can't believe I'm talking to Dan Fouts. I can't believe I'm talking to Mel Renfro. I can't believe I'm talking to Rich Brooks and Kenny Wheaton and Joey Harrington. And, Joey Harrington even ended up writing the foreword for the book. And so I just thought, like, this is why I do what I do. I like talking to talented people in a lot of lines of work, like whether they're architects or movie directors. But I grew up a sports fan and most of all a Duck fan, going to games at Autzen Stadium with my dad since I was 8 years old. And so, to me, I was just getting goosebumps talking to these people.
I can imagine. I mean, what a privilege to sit down with them. Who did you enjoy interviewing the most?
Wow. Well, a lot of the interviews were over the phone, and I had lunch with Joey Harrington, and so that was actually really special. And I remember we were having lunch somewhere in Portland, and I had like a list of notes, and I had written about a game that was a triple overtime win over USC at Autzen. I think maybe 2000 or 2001, and I had accidentally written double overtime, and he took my pen and crossed out overtime and wrote the number 3, like triple overtime. And so that was really fun. And I think, there's as a lot of your people and fans and people you've interviewed understand, like there's something particularly special about the 1994 team. And so, like I think you just interviewed Kristen McLemore recently, and I kept for years on my old answering machine. I kept an answering machine message from Kristen McLemore just saying, "Hey Brian, this is Kristen McLemore calling. Give me a ring back." And I just found it so fun and funny that this guy who was the record holder, the all-time leading receiver in Oregon history for a while, and a hero of the Civil War game that put Oregon in the Rose Bowl, had left. I remember saying to my wife, like, I can't believe I have a voicemail from Kristen McLemore on my voicemail. And so I think that 1994 team was really special, and including Rich Brooks.
Oh, no question. Did you interview Brooks? He seems like he would be a hard interview.
I did interview Brooks, and that was another thing that made me laugh thinking about it is, I had him on the phone for something like an hour and a half, and I usually, when I'm interviewing somebody as a journalist, like I usually have this rule where I kind of realize if I go much longer than an hour, then people start to get kind of tired, or I start to feel like I'm keeping them for too long. And so at some point I had Rich Brooks on the phone for like an hour and a half. And I said like, oh, well, I don't want to keep you too long. I can let you go. And he said, well, wait a minute. Don't you want to hear about this game? Don't you want to hear about that game? And I said, yeah, of course I do. Let's keep going, and his tenure was incredible because it was so long. And just before we got on air, I was looking at all the list of seasons that Rich Brooks had coached, and it was such an incredibly slow climb. And it wasn't even just a slow climb. It was like he would make some progress, like in the late '70s with a couple of winning seasons, and then they got on probation, and it was like several more losing seasons. They started to have like some marginal winning seasons, like in the '80s with Bill Musgrave, and then there was like another losing season again. And so I think like you could almost write a whole book just about the Rich Brooks tenure, both because it was long and also because it was like these fits and starts in it. Like it was a long, slow climb with peaks and valleys.
It was a struggle. They had some great fun players in those years, like Reggie Ogburn and Chris Miller and Tony Cherry and Lou Barnes, and and that era, 6 wins was a big deal.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've said that to so many people over the years. I say, I'm so proud of what the Ducks have become, and that they've challenged for national championships. That they've come a couple of plays from winning a national championship, particularly in 2010. And there are Rose Bowl victories, Fiesta Bowl victories. And yet I've said to people, in some ways, there was nothing beating the moment where my dad and I had like one of our only hugs of my lifetime when Oregon got to 6-5, or when, I've said to people, in some ways, nothing can ever beat the Pullen Weed Eater Independence Bowl in 1989 and winning that. So it's all relative. And when you've been a losing season for a decade or two, getting to 6-5 in its own way is as special as going undefeated in some of these couple of years that we've had since.
I totally agree. I remember the Poulon. I think the legendary Tim Brando did that game, if I remember right, on the Mizlu television network. And it was sleety and nasty. And then it was a great game. The Ducks made a big comeback to win the thing.
Yep. Bill Musgrave did a kind of touchdown dance as he took it on a keeper into the end zone, and it was just as good as it got.
Definitely, that team was gutty. It kind of typified the Rich Brooks era. We're not going to quit. We're not going down. We're going to get better. And even if we have to take it on the chin to lose 58-3 to Nebraska in Lincoln, we're going to come back. And this does not define us. I love that era.
Yeah, absolutely. There was the '89 season, and then it was the same way with the '94 season. Like there were some early losses in that season, I think starting 1 and 2, and then I was at that Rose Bowl. They played against Penn State, and I think that's the other thing that Oregon football has eventually taught me over the years is that there are sometimes when a loss can give you as much pride as a win. And I think particularly the 1994 season when we lost that Rose Bowl to Penn State, there were things about that Rose Bowl that were frustrating because there were a couple of times in the first half when Oregon got inside the 5 and got no points out of it. And then I think also, obviously, the 2010 national championship game against Auburn, that game, made me as upset as I've ever been as an Oregon fan. I was vomiting the next day. Because I was so upset the way we lost to Auburn, and the national championship was there for the taking, and yet like the more years have gone by, the more pride I feel at that team and how close they came, and the way they were down by 8 points, late in the fourth quarter, and got a touchdown and a 2-point conversion to tie the national championship game with like a minute and change left. I can always hear Jerry Green in my head going, "We're tied at 19." And so, sometimes like a loss is actually as pride inducing as a win.
I totally believe that. Yeah, and at the end of the day, We as fans have got to love and appreciate these guys for the effort, the sacrifice, the dedication that makes it possible for Oregon to have become one of the premier programs in college football.
Oh yeah. If you would have told me when I was a kid what Oregon would achieve, uh, ultimately, it just would have. I wouldn't have even had dreams like that. I would have thought, someday maybe we can win one Rose Bowl. Um, and the idea of even being in the running for a national championship didn't even seem like something you would dream about. Like it would be like, oh, I really hope we can win the Pac-10 conference, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll sneak by a Michigan or Ohio State or something like that. And so, it is true when the prognosticators and the talking heads talk that everything everything Oregon has in its trophy case everything but a national championship, and that is certainly true. And yet, I think one thing that's great about growing up with a team that loses as much as it wins is that you are a little bit better able to keep it in perspective, and you don't have that same sense of entitlement. Like every once in a while, I've met somebody who's a fan of one of those teams, like let's say like the Los Angeles Lakers or the New York Yankees, and I'll say to them, I feel sorry for you because you're just used to winning championships, and you're never going to get to experience the ultimate joy, which is when you've climbed all the way from the bottom. I think of like the tears rolling down my cheeks after the Civil War game in 1994, and that was not just because we were going to the Rose Bowl. It was because I had sat through a lot of losing seasons in the rain at Autzen Stadium.
12-yard pass to Dino Filia in the fourth quarter to win the thing. Man, that was a moment.
I always remember that because it was a really funny situation. Like, even though I was born in Eugene, and even though I grew up going to Oregon Duck football games with my dad, I actually went to college in New York City. And so, and I ended up actually in '94 seeing the first and the last game. I went to Autzen and saw the opener against Portland State, and I went to the Rose Bowl and saw them play at Penn State, PSU and PSU. But for most of that season, I was in New York City, and I became kind of like what you would call like an honorary member of the New York City chapter of the Oregon Alumni Club. So I was in a sports bar watching that 1994 Civil War with the Oregon Alumni Club, and I remember how tense it was. Like, a lot of people were kind of having beers and having fun, and I was going like, "Shut up! This is too serious," And then finally, the game was secured, only in the last few seconds. Like, even at the very end, Oregon State was threatening it with throws to the end zone. But finally, Oregon got the win, and we were going to the Rose Bowl, this unbelievable thing. And I remember somebody handing out to all of us long-stemmed roses. And then I was like walking from the sports bar to the subway station on the Upper West Side. And like, I'm clutching this long-stemmed rose, and there are like tears streaming down my cheeks, and I'm like getting into the New York City subway, and it was just, it's so surreal.
Start spreading the news. The Ducks are going back to the Rose Bowl after a 37-year absence. Pretty awesome stuff.
Oh yeah. And going to that 1994 Rose Bowl with my dad, I'll never forget it. It's the most joy I've ever had at an Oregon loss. Like, I grew up in kind of a religious family, and I remember walking into the Rose Bowl stadium like an hour or two before game time with my dad, and we had left Oregon, and it had been like raining and cold, and we walked into that Rose Bowl stadium, which is in my mind the greatest stadium in America architecturally. This beautiful, perfect bowl that could be like the Roman Colosseum, and we walk in and you see that perfectly green grass, and I remember my dad said, "I think we just entered the Garden of Eden." I had tears again with when Oregon ran onto the field, and my dad and I had a little bit of almost like imposter syndrome, because we were just in awe of seeing Penn State and seeing those white uniforms, and at the time Joe Paterno was such an icon, and his reputation was still completely intact, and we just thought, I can't believe our Ducks are on even the same field as Penn State. And yet, so just being at that Rose Bowl stadium, again, that's as good as it ever can get. Just feeling like we died and gone to heaven.
the granddaddy with the sun setting over the San Gabriel Mountains, the whole atmosphere and all the history of that place. It is like you're going to the perfect cathedral of college football.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, because I write about architecture and design, uh, uh, and yet I'm a big Duck fan and had been spent time as a Ducks historian. I think stadiums are one of the places where it overlaps, and I love that Rose Bowl stadium. And I think it's worth stating that we are so lucky to have Autzen Stadium. Um, I really have always been a believer that basically architecturally there's only two basic kinds of stadiums, what I call the bowls and the bleachers. The bowls are the more kind of pure and they're more uncommon, but a lot of the greatest stadiums of all time are bowls. You have the Rose Bowl, you have Michigan Stadium, Notre Dame Stadium, and they're all kind of based on like the Roman Colosseum. But I think like when you're in them, they have this pure bowl shape, and you can be, it sounds pretentious to say, but you can be kind of like enveloped by them. But by that, what I mean is, these other kind where it's just like four bleachers on four sides, like you kind of look through that corner and you can just see like the neighborhood or like an ambulance parked or something. And so I think like when you're in the bowl stadium, like you get sort of, it just becomes like encompassing of your experience. And I think they're just more beautiful, like when you see like the Goodyear blimp photo from overhead or something. So I think like Autzen Stadium, for a team that didn't have in those days a lot of glorious history, like we got gifted this stadium in Autzen Stadium that is right up there with the great stadiums of college football. And then of course like the acoustics of it, the way that pound for pound Autzen Stadium can generate so much more noise than opposing fans are expecting. Some of that was like the partial canopy on one side of the stadium, but I think also these bowls like also contribute to the acoustics because the sound doesn't have anywhere to go. It just sort of stays in the stadium. And so I think we're just so blessed to have Autzen Stadium. There's part of me that lamented a little bit when they expanded Autzen after the 2001 season because it lost its symmetry. And so, there have been whispers about Oregon someday expanding Autzen again. And I've even talked with an architect who couldn't talk to me about it, who would only kind of, wink or sort of grunt a little bit if I was onto something correct. But, there is, I believe, some at least informal talk about expanding Autzen. And part of the thinking is that they would actually restore that kind of perfect symmetry. And so it would be like the same size all the way around. Because it is kind of like there are so many college football stadiums that you look at and that I call like Franken stadiums, like, Penn State or certain other ones where it's like you can tell like they built onto it all these different times. And it's like all these pieces that are kind of thrust together and they're like puzzle pieces that don't fit, or like a shirt that has like pieces of other shirts like stitched onto it or something. And so I do have some hope that eventually Autzen might be expanded to sort of restore that perfect symmetry.
Well, the symmetry is definitely one part of it, and its acoustic qualities make it the place where dreams go to die, as Lloyd Carr once said. But what really completes the picture at Autzen are the people who fill it, and the feeling of being an Oregon fan, and the way this fan base loves their team and this community.
Yeah, yeah. I feel so lucky to have started going to Autzen at the age of 8. Like, my dad went to Oregon. Both my parents went to college at Oregon, and so my dad had been going for many years to Hayward Field, and he saw, some of the Casanova teams, Jerry Fry teams, and he still kept going in the 70s when they were a terrible team under like, Dick Enright and some of those people. I remember there were years where I was a little kid and he didn't think I was old enough to go yet. And he'd come back and be like, oh, man, UCLA and Freeman McNeil ran all over us. But I appreciate that he just kept going. It's a special kind of fan who keeps their season tickets or keeps going even when the team is not very good. And so, eventually when I was 8 years old, he decided I was old enough. And the first game I saw was a 7-7 tie between Oregon and Kansas. But he took me to like 2 or 3 games that year. And then at the season's end, we went to Oregon State and saw the Civil War of 1980 in what was then called Parker Stadium, now Reser Stadium. And that was actually one of my parents' favorite stories about me as a little kid, because I was 8 years old, and my mom had a boss who gave her my mom's boss was an Oregon State grad, and he had season tickets to the Beavers, and he was a donor, so we had really good seats. And so he gave my mom these 2 tickets to the Civil War game in the middle of the Oregon State donor section. And my dad and I went, and it was like one of those winter days where it's like it was really sunny but cold, and little kids, like, they don't want to wear a coat, and so I left my coat in the car, and so we're in the stadium at the game, and I'm just like absolutely shivering. Like, I ended up getting the flu later that night. We're absolutely shivering, but I was just the most obnoxious kid, just saying everything, screaming my guts out. And I always remember there late in the game, Oregon has like a couple of touchdown lead on Oregon State, and this Oregon State fan who was drunk in front of, he just turns around and he goes, "Little kid, I hope you freeze to death."
That's hate. That's sports hate. That's pure, unadulterated hate.
Yeah. In some ways I probably deserved it. Like, I was so obnoxious, but that 1980 team, actually, that was great too. You don't hear people talk about that very much, but Oregon, as you know, had this quarterback, Reggie Ogburn, this running.
Oh, he's amazing.
Really a kind of forerunner of some of the modern quarterbacks who can run with the ball. And that was a really special season too. They were 6-3-2 that year, and I think they tied the number 1 team in the country, USC, as one of those 2 ties, and they tied Notre Dame as well. And so that was a great season. But I always remember those words. I almost feel like I could frame that, like they validated me as an Oregon fan. Little kid, I hope you freeze to death.
That means you were being a really good fan. Ogburn and Achilles Smith are 2 guys that, man, in the modern era with a spread offense and maybe a little bit of up tempo, they would crush.
Yep. Achilles Smith was so great, and he had been good the year before, but then he comes in 1998 and is just he wasn't that far away from being a Heisman finalist. And 1998. The other thing you have with the Ducks, or any longtime fan has, is you have certain seasons where you can see they're setting up to be something potentially really, really special, and then something catastrophic happens, usually with injuries. Oregon most famously had it with Dennis Dixon, where he was really kind of the favorite for the Heisman Trophy in 2007. But 1998 was another one of those years where Oregon had Achilles Smith at quarterback, and they had Reuben Drones at running back. And they had this midseason showdown with UCLA, where both of the teams were in the top 10. And Reuben Drones broke his leg in that game, and that
finished the game.
Yeah, which is crazy. But that year in 1998, Oregon ended up going to the Aloha Bowl and losing to Rick Neuheisel's Colorado team. That team deserved better, because Achilles Smith, you're right, he was really kind of like a foreshadowing of people like Darren Thomas and Marcus Mariota, somebody who could do a lot with his legs, but it was just really an incredible passer. Like I saw some Achilles Smith quarterback games where it was just like virtuosity. I remember going to a game against Stanford, and the score was something like 63-19 or 63-25 or something, and it was just like he would just thread the needle time and again.
Had a couple of really good receivers. Was Griffin on that team?
Damon Griffin was one of them. Yeah.
I mean, and they would cook. That team averaged something like 38 points a game in an era where they huddled every play.
Yeah. I think so it's a little bit bittersweet when I think of Achilles, also because you see some of these Oregon quarterbacks go to the NFL, and I've always really believed that circumstances when you get to the NFL can be a big factor in whether you're successful or not. There are some quarterbacks, obviously, who are good college quarterbacks who just aren't able to make the transition because their talent is not necessarily completely applicable, but there are times when a good college quarterback just kind of gets chewed up by a bad team in the NFL. And so, I think it's unfortunate because Akili, maybe if he had been in a little bit different situation, could have been a successful NFL quarterback. And so, there are things about his career that are bittersweet, but I think ultimately, just like you're saying, at the end of the day, you just want to have a smile on your face, thinking in a way that guy could just absolutely light it up.
Since then, Brian, the Ducks have been to 3 Rose Bowls and won them. They beat what? They beat Wisconsin in the 2012 Rose Bowl, number 1 Florida State in 2015, and that great 2019 team with Justin Herbert at quarterback and Penei Sewell clearing the way up front. They won the 2020 Rose Bowl.
Yeah, and I do think there's something that remains special about the Rose Bowl. I think it's unfortunate in a way sometimes that it's like a semifinal or a quarterfinal or something, because I actually kind of miss the days where you could potentially win a Rose Bowl and then just ride off into the sunset. Like, we have that unbelievable Rose Bowl against Florida State, and then we have to go a week later and have a little bit of bad luck or whatever, again, lose the national championship to Ohio State. Mariota gets partially injured early in the game, and Ohio State has some future pros like Ezekiel Elliott and Joey Bosa, who are really talented. And in a way, like I miss the days before the college playoff where you could just win a January Bowl and ride off into the sunset. But it is kind of true that on one hand, like even before the playoff, like on one hand, like a Rose Bowl and a Fiesta Bowl were completely equal, but in another sense, like there's nothing that beats winning a Rose Bowl.
I totally agree, and I feel a little bit sad that we've lost that era. The whole idea now is to make everything bigger and better, expand the playoffs to 24 teams. But I love the era where you could win a bowl game and feel good about yourself and feel optimistic about where your program was headed. And now bowl games are an afterthought and players skip them. And we kind of lost something along the way.
Yeah. I have, like, just off camera here, I have a wall of.
Show us.
It's a desktop computer, so I can only turn it so far.
Okay. Wow, that is a cool wall.
Yeah, there's a little bit more there. And the reason I bring it up is because based on the system I have, I should have an Orange Bowl photo. I used to kind of have a kind of agreement with myself that anytime Oregon won a January Bowl, something was going on the wall, either a newspaper framed or a photo from the game. And so, like I've got the 2011-2012 Rose Bowl over Wisconsin. I've got the Fiesta Bowl win the following year over Kansas State. I've got something from 2010 from the Civil War game where we qualified to go to the national championship game. I've got the 2002 Fiesta Bowl with Joey Harrington. And I've got a photo of Justin Herbert from the 2019 Rose Bowl. I've got Mariota's Heisman, and so when we won that Orange Bowl this year, that was another kind of, pinch me moment where I was just like, it felt like anytime we win a January Bowl, that's really special. But then, going out and getting clobbered by Indiana in a really upsetting game the following week, that I think it's a weird situation that Oregon has been in the last couple of years. Like, Dan Lanning, we could not possibly be more blessed than we are having Dan Lanning as a coach.
Totally agree.
And the success that Oregon has had the last couple of years, it's unbelievable. I mean, Oregon is, since 2023, Oregon is number 1 in wins in the country. And so that's just unbelievable. But I think it's just like, it's really, it just sucks that we have these couple of years in a row where we've just been blown out, most recently by Indiana, and before that in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. And so, that Orange Bowl victory last year was really kind of overshadowed and tainted by the blowout loss to Indiana. And I thought it was maybe somewhat likely that we would lose to Indiana, or at least I was giving us like a 50-50 chance, but I did not see that blowout coming. And so I think, I really, but I think like in a way like that in a certain respect, like if I were like a screenwriter, I would say like that actually gives us the adversity that we need to have like the highest amount of joy. Like if Oregon does ever get to the top of the mountain and win a national championship, we're going to think about those blowout losses to Indiana and Ohio State as part of like the adversity. Like we haven't had a losing season in a little while. So that's one kind of adversity. But these blowout losses where it's just like, bordering on humiliating, at least embarrassing. Those give us, in a sense, like those give us a kind of fuel of adversity and a motivating factor. Like I guarantee you that Dan Lanning is quite aware of that he's going like, hey, Indiana blew us out. Like we've got something to prove. Like we may be number one in wins over the last couple of years since 2023, but like we've been blown out on the biggest stages in college football a couple of years now, and so hopefully that will fuel the team. It's funny because it takes a hell of a lot just to get to that point, to get to a Rose Bowl or to a national semifinal. And we can't ever take that for granted because it's a blessing just to get to that point, to have the privilege of being blown out by Indiana, so to speak. But at the same time, like those blowouts ought to give us the kind of final bit of fuel we need to make it to the top of the mountain.
It really feels like they will, Brian, because Coach Lanning has taken this team a little bit further every year. First year in the Big Ten, they won the Big Ten championship, which is not a small accomplishment. Second year, they got blown out of the quarterfinals by Ohio State, as you pointed out. This year, or this just past year, the win over Texas Tech was masterful. They throttled the Red Raiders in every phase of the game. Defense played a perfect game, 23-0 shutout. And then the national championship semifinal was a quicksand game. Things went wrong from the start. They turned the ball over twice inside their own 10. And hats off to Indiana. That was an amazing run. But I feel like these Ducks have a little bit of steel in their eyes. Jamari Johnson, the tight end, who's a great player, going to have a fine season. He said, I don't want to have that feeling again. And I think that's a resolve they will take with them all through the season.
Absolutely. I think anything can happen. Like, I think maybe it's just emotional self-protection on my part, but I'm not going to go there and say I think it's going to happen because in a way, like, when I was growing up going to games with my dad was superstitious. Like he had all these rules, like we can't park in the parking lot because that's a jinx, or I can't take radio into the game because that's a jinx. And so I feel like there's a part of me that retains that and feels like if I say I think Oregon's going to win the national title, then that will jinx them. But I also think as a fan, like I think it's hard to explain, but I think there's actually, I've almost come to believe personally that I need to make peace with the fact that we may never win it. And paradoxically, that may be what needs to happen for us to win it. I know that sounds a little bit silly. There's like,
it doesn't.
I think there's something in certain like books, like in like mythology, and even like I remember my wife reading Harry Potter, and I've never read Harry Potter, but there's a moment where like where Harry Potter, like at the very, very end of like the last novel, I think he like kind of like accepts that he's not going to beat the bad guy, Voldemort, and then that humility actually gives him the magic power he needs to vanquish his enemy. And so I think like if I start to say this is the year we're going to win it, I know most fans, it serves them well to radiate positivity and to always be optimistic. And so that's not wrong. But I think like for me as an Oregon fan, maybe it's the kid in me who saw all those losing seasons. But I feel like I'm not gonna hold my breath to get a national championship because I want to be grateful for everything that we've achieved. And I'm going to be a little bit pleasantly surprised whenever we do it, no matter how much we've been building to it. I think like I can't quite allow myself to say like this year we're going to do it because there have been too many years where I've seen like the team derailed by injuries or something like that. Like it's all just like so precarious. It's like this. Actually, you know what I tell Pete, what I say to my friends or to my wife or everything is, I say every Duck season or every season for the team you love is like this house of cards that you're building. And sometimes if you're building a house of cards, like all you have to do is like exhale a little heavy, and like the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. And so I think you need talent, you need you need like expertise and all these things, but you also need just like a little bit of luck. And I feel like you know, we are as well set up to win the national championship this year as we've ever been. And I think that is true. And you hear that from the prognosticators. There are definitely talking heads out there, like Joel Klatt at Fox, for example, who are saying, you know, Oregon's the best team in college football. And the coaches picked us number 2 in the country. AP will probably pick us either 1 or 2 in the country. And so on paper, particularly with like a returning quarterback and what you said about Dan Lanning's teams getting better every year, everything is set up for us to win the title this year. But I just know there's an element of chance and luck that you just never know. We might actually win the national title like in a couple of years where we have some freshman quarterback and nobody is expecting us to win it. Like that actually almost happened in 2012 with Mariota. Like his freshman year, we came as close as we ever have to winning it. Like if we would have won that Stanford game at the end of the regular season in 2012, like we just barely lost to Stanford at home in overtime. Like if we would have won that Stanford game, we would have been in the national title game against Notre Dame, and we would have beat Notre Dame. It ended up being Alabama defeating Notre Dame for the title, but you know, we would have won that game and we would have been the national champions in Mariota's freshman year. And so sometimes the great season happens when you're not quite expecting it. But, you know, I will say that we're as well set up with like a team of veterans and 5-star players and great coaching and a seasoned Dante Moore that we're as well set up as you could possibly be to win it this year. So I hope we do, obviously.
I agree with you. You need a little bit of destiny, a little bit of luck, and a bit of magic to win it all. It's a 25-week grind from the time practice starts until the national championship game, which is too late in the year, by the way. January 25th for the last game of college football is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the Ducks are right there. We'll just have to enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit, Brian. I've enjoyed this conversation so much, and I thank you for coming on. Let's talk uniforms. You're wearing a vintage Kenny Wheaton jersey. Please stand up. All right. It's especially appropriate that you wore this today because today is 20 days until opening kickoff. So you're kind of a uniform nerd.
Yeah. And I have a little bit of a contrarian point of view because I greatly love the uniforms that Oregon gave up. I love the 80s uniforms that Bill Musgrave wore, that Derek Lavelle wore, that Lou Barnes wore. What's funny is like this jersey I'm wearing from '94, the Kenny Wheaton jersey, this is kind of treated as like the gold standard of the old school uniforms. But the funny thing is even this is like an unfortunate change for me. Like I think it's a little bit cheesy having this Donald Duck logo on here. And there were some uniforms right before this that I loved that just had the stripe without the Donald Duck. And I remember in the 90s, I was disappointed. I'm such a nerd, but I lamented the fact that we got rid of the stripe on the pants and we got rid of the center helmet stripe. And so I like these old school uniforms that have what I call, again, I'm such a nerd, but I call it the stripe trifecta. When the stripe on the sleeve, the stripe on the pants, and the stripe on the helmet all match. And so that's what I love. And I think, you know, when they switched the uniforms for the first time substantially in 1999, I actually really liked those uniforms. And I did some reporting on that. I did an article for Willamette Week newspaper, and I interviewed Mike Bellotti about the uniforms, and I interviewed some designers at Nike, like Todd Van Horn, about the uniforms. And I actually did really like those uniforms that had they were green helmets, pants, and jerseys, and they had it was really unusual for the time. They had a stripe on the pants that continued all the way up the side of the jersey. And
I remember a yellow stripe.
yeah, and people were a little bit miffed because they changed the shade of the green from this Kelly green that I'm wearing to what Nike called forest green. And so I was actually at one of those first games, and a guy in the stands at Autzen said to me, "What are those, black?" And it was just like a dark green. And so as you get into some of the uniforms in the subsequent years, like I think the interchangeability and all the uniform combinations, I think that's really cool. And so I would basically say, like, the modern uniforms, some of them I really like and others not so much. I think for me personally, I'm only speaking about my own taste, but I have disliked it when we have what I would call like faux patterning. And so like the year, the 2010 national championship year, we had these kind of like Roman gladiator duck feathers on the shoulder. And I still look back at pictures of those, and I think it looks a little bit dated and cheesy. And the year 2014, when we went to the national title game, we had a different version of like these duck feathers on the shoulders, and it's just not for me, any of that kind of patterning. And yet there are other things that I do like. I really liked the winged helmets when they brought those. I forget what year those debuted. I think it was in the 2012 Rose Bowl against Wisconsin. The one change I would have made is I loved the wings on the sides of the helmets, and I made this realization at the time that the most classic college football programs don't have like a letter or an identifying name on it. Like Ohio State, they just have the Buckeyes on the helmet. There's nothing that says like Ohio State in cursive. Like Michigan has like their iconic helmets. They don't need like an M for Michigan. Like we know who they are. Like Alabama has the numbers on the very, very old school numbers. Penn State has the plain helmets. Like all those iconic teams, I think they're kind of going like, hey, we don't need to put our name or our letter on the side of the helmet. You know who we are. And so when Oregon took on the wings on the side of the helmet, I thought that was really cool. Like everybody's just going to see the wings and know it's ducks. But the one thing I didn't like is the O on the back of the helmet. Like I understand the whole inspiration for it was the Harley that gets ridden onto the field at the start of the game, and it's like kind of meant to resemble like the gas tank. And so the O sticker on the back of the helmet, was part of that whole thing. But I thought like the O sticker on the back of the helmet is the Achilles heel of the winged helmets. Like I think the wings are enough. Like, and I think the O is overkill, like an O for overkill. And
so it's too busy for you.
Yeah. Or it's just like it's unnecessary. Like in design, I write about design for a living. I write about architecture for a living, and so I just really like things that are clean and simple and elegant. And but there have been modern versions, contemporary versions of the Oregon uniforms that do that. Like the Justin Herbert Rose Bowl year 2019, under I think like Mario Cristobal had an influence on the uniforms. Like I think he must have preferred something a little bit simpler. And so in those years, you had the interchangeability and everything, but you had a little bit simpler, clean look during some of those years. And so it's been interesting under Dan Lanning. I kind of suspect that he is a little bit of an old school guy when it comes to uniforms, because there's been a kind of restoration of some of the older uniform cues, like they brought back the helmets with the Oregon O on the side, and they have a version of the jerseys now that is like a kind of red, a reborn version. It's not a literally throwback jersey, but it's in a kind of throwback style. And so overall, I quite like the Oregon uniforms now. But that for me, it'll always be green jersey, yellow helmet, yellow pants. Like that's the most where it's at to me. And maybe it doesn't matter to me if you have a UO on the side or an O, or you have the wings, but like I like it most when we have green jersey, yellow pants, yellow helmet. I think that's one of my things also. Like I like it when the when the helmet and the pants are the same color and then the jersey is a different color. Actually, one thing that's very common with football uniforms in both college and the NFL now is I don't love it when everything is the same color. When you have like green jersey, pants, and helmet, or yellow jersey, pants, and helmet. Um, I'm not saying it's impossible for it to look good, but I like it when there's a little bit of variation in colors between like the jersey and the helmets and pants. And I personally like it the most when the helmets and pants are the same color.
I think the looks that you're describing make it easier for the quarterback. It's a little just a touch easier to pick up your guys if there's that contrast,
Yeah.
And I think that uniform should always, they don't necessarily have to be all old school or throwback looks, but they should honor history in some way.
Yeah. I think my least favorite is when we do these one-off uniforms where it's just like all bets are off. Like we're wearing pink uniforms, or we're wearing like, Lewis and Clark trail uniforms. I think like there was like a Hawaii Ohana tribute uniform. And I felt a little bit torn because in a way, like those were actually really cool stylistically. But, there are times where we do some kind of one-off thing. And I understand that for Nike, it's a business and you want to have another type of jersey to sell. And the fans, the fans sometimes really enjoy it. Like I want to be self-aware here and realize that I'm an old fogey. Like I'm 54 years old, and this is jerseys are for teenagers. Like, I actually never wear it. I love this jersey, but I never really wear it to the grocery store because part of me is like, you know what? I'm a grown man. Like a jersey is for kids. I know I'm kind of in the minority of that opinion. And so, but, so whatever opinions I'm expressing about the uniforms and the jerseys, I just like want to look in the mirror, be self-aware, and understand that like it's not for me. Like they can do whatever they want, and if fans like it, it's like it's great. And I'd rather win that national title in a clown suit and get blown out by Indiana in the perfect old school Bill Musgrave uniform.
I agree with you. I believe that uniforms more than anything are for players and recruits. If you look good, you play good, and you want to be the team that catches kids' attention when they're 14, first getting serious about being a college football player. Oregon was always my favorite team growing up. But no matter what happens, man, let's go out and have a great season and enjoy it. Brian, graduate of New York University, author of how many books?
A few.
A few.
I'm most excited about my new book that's coming out 1 month from today. It's called In Search of Portland. And I won't bore you with a long explanation of what it's about, but it's kind of the culmination of my career. The writing the Duck books were the most fun. And this one is like what I've really been building to, In Search of Portland.
Well, I know from interacting with you in social media that you are a serious student of architecture and a serious student of the human experience. It is an absolute delight to have you on the Oregon Fan Show, and I hope you'll come back and talk with us during the year about where this team is going and what the experience has been like.
Well, thank you. I'm really tickled by the opportunity, and it's so fun to talk about this. And I don't have photos of architecture and design in my office. I have nothing but wall-to-wall Ducks stuff. Like I've got Autzen Stadium right here. I've got Dan Fouts in his San Diego Chargers uniform behind me.
Nice.
And so that's what the Ducks are what I love the most. The Ducks football team is what I love the most, and so it's really a lot of fun to talk about it with you. And I appreciate and love what you do.
Well, thank you so much. Folks, I want to send a special message to everyone out there. If you've enjoyed this conversation, Brian Libby needs an Orange Bowl photograph for his wall. Don't let him down. Send that photograph. Have a great day, everyone, and go Ducks.
You bet. Go Ducks. Thank you.